It's a program President Biden once called inhumane, yet thousands of migrants are once again waiting in Mexico for the chance to have their asylum claims heard by the United States. Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. This December, the Biden administration reached an agreement with the Mexican government to reinstate a Trump-era program known as Remain in Mexico. It requires migrants to wait in Mexico while U.S. officials consider their claims. The U.S. government has also kept Title 42 in place. That's a public health rule that allows border agents to immediately expel migrants because of the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the only exception has been unaccompanied children and some families. CGTN's Alasdair Baverstock shows us how the Mexican government is responding to the migrant crisis.
When desperate migrants are held in a specific place for too long, a common phenomenon is for a migrant caravan to form. Thousands of people moving en masse, which the authorities cannot stop. It's not easy. Fights, hunger, sleeping outdoors, face-offs with the Mexican authorities, and a lot of walking. Caravan participants negate any asylum plea they might have registered with the Mexican authorities.
If a migrant joins a caravan with the intention of migrating north, then they are expressing their disinterest in their plea for refuge in Mexico and end their asylum process through abandonment.
Progress is slow. Nevertheless, it's an effective way to move. Migrants moving outside of the herd are easily picked off by migration agents, or worse, bad guys in the caravan itself.
It's dangerous, that's for sure. Even within the caravan, there are bad groups who you try to avoid, but generally we are united. It's definitely worse to be travelling alone.
12 days into the caravan's journey, Obel and his wife are fleeing the poverty in Venezuela, where they say wages are at $2 a day. Indeed, people here are from across the globe, rallying behind caravan leaders like Ireneo Mujica, now guiding his 5th caravan.
We're living through the same criminalization that we always do. The authorities tell you that if you behave as they want you to, you'll be helped. But it's not true.
Yet today, mega caravans don't generally make it all the way to the US border. Migrant leaders say the only effective way the Mexican government has found to break up a caravan has been to offer migratory visas to its members, allowing them to remain in Mexico or continue to the US border alone. But the negotiation process can last for weeks, and in the meantime, the challenge for the caravan is to remain united. As this caravan comes to an end, its members have succeeded. They have been awarded humanitarian visas for 12 months. Yet, as Mexico holds people at its southern border, the town of Tapachula will continue to live through the worst of the migration crisis. Alasdair Baverstock, CGTN, Tapachula, Mexico.
For more now on the situation at the US-Mexico border and immigration, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Texas is Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. She's an immigration attorney and board president of VECINA, an immigration justice advocacy organization. Also from Washington, D.C. is Adolfo Franco. He's an attorney and Republican strategist. From New York, Kim Ives is a journalist and editor of Haiti Liberte, newsweekly. And from Mexico City, Laura Carlson is the director of Americas.org and Independent Policy Center. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Laura, as we just heard, the Biden administration is using 2 policies to prevent migrants from entering the United States. That's the Remain in Mexico policy and Title 42, which, as we heard, is a health law. U.S. Border Police have reported that they arrested 173 people at the border, and that was just in November. What do you make of the use of these policies, and what kind of pressure is it putting on Mexico?
Both policies are illegal and inhumane. When we look at Title 42, these are both policies that originated in the Trump administration as pretext for the white supremacist policy strategy of keeping people out, immigrants out of the United States. Title 22 is a very obscure law with a health pretext that most health experts have already denied, in the sense that immigrants somehow are more dangerous for the spread of the coronavirus than people within the country. There's no evidence for this, and yet they're continuing to use it in the Biden administration to reduce the number of people who are allowed to seek asylum in the United States. Now, seeking asylum is an international right under international law, and yet under this health pretext, they're completely denied even making their cases for asylum. And the migrant protection protocols, ironically called because they do everything but protect migrants, are also a program that was developed by the Trump administration to keep people from being able to make asylum cases. So, as you mentioned, people go into the United States, or people try to make their cases there, and they're sent back to Mexico to wait for their hearings and the results of their cases. We've already seen what happens with this. There are thousands and tens of thousands of people on the border living in appalling conditions. I visited those camps. The children and the women who have special rights and should have special protections are almost most vulnerable in many of these. And in fact, there's been reported that there's at least 1,600 violent crimes that have been committed against migrants when they're forced to come back to Mexico. Yeah. The Biden administration has said that it was from a court order, but they could easily have said to the Mexican government can reject this program and we don't have to implement. But we know then that there was pressure actually on the Mexican government to accept the program, which they did, which indicates a lot of ambivalence within the Biden administration on immigrants and asylum rights.
Right. Laura, one point very quickly, which we heard in our report there, we heard that Mexican officials say that those people who join these caravans heading to the border actually give up their right to asylum. How does that work?
It's much more complex, but if they do not stay in the place in Mexico where they applied for asylum in Mexico, then they no longer can continue with their process. So that means that many of them, increasing numbers, are also looking for asylum in Mexico, but when they despair of results because the process is so slow here and there's so many violations of rights that are involved, and continue and go to another place, then they lose that process. Okay. They don't necessarily lose it if they have applied for Mexico. The other part of this is that they can no longer apply in the United States.
All right, let me get Adolfo Franco's view on this. Adolfo, we just heard that one of the policies being used by the Biden administration, remain in Mexico. It's a Trump-era policy, actually, and we just heard Laura tell us that it's illegal, inhumane.
Well, I don't think the courts in the United States think it's illegal and inhumane, and I don't think the Biden administration thinks so. I think the Biden administration was looking for a way out of a disastrous policy that they implemented that blew up in their face, and then now we're back to square one. So I think my sources here in Washington, and they're at the White House, the Democrat sources, were looking for a quote-unquote a way out, and the way out was to simply say, well, the courts have upheld this and we need to do this. Here's the problem with the other guests' analysis. This is all skipped asylum cases. These aren't asylum cases. The vast majority of these cases, almost their entirety, are intending immigrants, meaning people coming for economic purposes. That's why they're not applying for asylum in Mexico, because their intended destination, if you interview any of them, and I've spoken to thousands of them over my career, they intend to come to work in the United States, not in Mexico or seek political asylum, the vast majority. We really have now 164 countries that are represented in this really tsunami of illegals, illegal intending immigrants for economic reasons that were caused by this administration's failed policy at the beginning of this administration. So you have to look at this, what the reality is on the ground. We simply have a country of laws. To come here for economic reasons is not a basis for immigrating to the United States through the asylum process, which is really what they seek to a shortcut. But quickly on the return to Mexico, why that is essential is, and Laura sort of jumped over this, is these people, if they remain in the United States in their process, they're given a court date because, of course, there's a huge backlog. And what happens is they never show up. They end up being part of these millions of people millions of people in the United States that are here illegally. That's just a fact. And this is what they're doing. Last point, as you brought up the health point, you know, it is a heck of a lot easier in this country, it seemed for a while, to immigrate, come in illegally, than legally. We had bans on legal tourism business from Europe and other countries, and yet we were letting people into the country with COVID, without testing, a completely different standard.
Adolfo,
for
Adolfo,
migrants.
even the CDC said that the use of that particular provision, Title 42, for expelling, they didn't support that. Its use for
the CDC is not a policy-making organization in terms of the immigration laws of the United States. It is a health organization. But here's the fact. People were coming into the country without being tested. They were coming with standards far lower than what we were imposing on legal immigrants and visitors.
All right, I want to go to Texas, to Kate. Kate, on Friday, the Biden administration suffered what has been described as a major blow on its efforts to bring some change to the immigration system when the U.S. Senate parliamentarian ruled that the administration's efforts to allow millions of migrants to stay in the country must be removed from the Build Back Better bill, which is sitting in Congress right now. How big a setback was that?
It was pretty disappointing. It's, you know, par for the course. This is what we've seen over the decades from Congress. We haven't had any real immigration reform since the amnesty laws of the 1980s, and especially post 9/11, every attempt to do anything to handle the undocumented population in the United States has died in Congress. And no matter which side of this argument you fall on, everyone understands that we have an undocumented population, that it is not feasible, whether or not you think it should happen, it is not economically feasible or wise to even attempt to deport this population. And so why wouldn't we all come together and at least agree that we can bring this population out of the shadows and register them? But I have to respond to two things that Adolfo said. I want to just say I am an asylum attorney. I have been practicing asylum for almost 15 years, so 10 years before Trump took office. And I want to say that it is not mutually exclusive for someone to flee violence in their country and seek asylum in the United States and also want to work in the United States. The other thing he said that is just flat out false is that asylum seekers abscond and don't attend their court hearings. All of the studies that have looked at this, including ICE's own studies, have showed that with support, these asylum seekers who, if the system is running right, have passed a credible fear interview and have every reason to show up for asylum, do by more than 90%. And so all that we need to do, and when we return back to border policy discussion, in my opinion, as a longtime practitioner of asylum law, is provide people the opportunity to apply for asylum through the credible fear interview process. And that's what we lost under the Trump administration, and that is what Biden has failed to bring back.
Well, that's just a fantasy, and with all due respect. Here are the facts. The individuals that are largely from Central America and other than Venezuela or Cuba in our hemisphere are not fleeing what our law contemplates, which is political persecution. There's some vague claim of overall violence. That's not a basis for it. These are intending immigrants for economic purposes. This is not the traditional political asylum of a repressive regime. If we had thousands of people amassed on the border that are coming from North Korea or Cuba or the former, when I'm old enough, the former Soviet Union, I would agree entirely with the guest, but this is just absolutely not true. And if anybody believes that's watching this program that there isn't a problem with catch and release, this is why we have 11 million people. I was in the Reagan administration when we were dealing at the time with 3 million, and the same arguments were made, and now we're talking about 12 million because of the policies advocated by the guests on these programs that are intended to have an open border policy.
Okay, I want to move on to Kim Ives in New York. Kim, let's talk about Haiti. You've done a lot of work, a lot of reporting on Haiti and Haitians. I mean, the country is reeling from an earthquake, the assassination of the president, and, of course, a collapsing economy. There's been thousands of Haitians who've tried to get into the United States, but many have been expelled back to Port-au-Prince mainly on these charter flights, which was organized by the Biden administration. What is the situation now?
Well, yeah, today we had 2 charter flights, 2 ICE flights, take back another 217 migrants. That makes about 10,700 since September 19th, when the crisis at the border with Del Rio, Texas, where 15,000 Haitians massed under a bridge there. And in the course of the whole Biden administration, about 13,600 Haitians have been sent back on 137 flights. So you have this massive return of Haitians. And the irony is the State Department is warning Americans not to go to Haiti. It's too dangerous, too terrible. And not only that, they're telling Americans in Haiti to get out right away. There's always about 50,000 or so there. And yet they're sending back tens of thousands of Haitians to Haiti. So it's a hugely ironic and incongruous situation with that.
What is your view on the fact that tens of thousands of people, as you say, Kim, are being sent back? I mean, the United States has long guaranteed the right of individuals to seek asylum when they arrive at the border. They should also receive protection from the United States. So in that respect, how do these mass expulsions square with the legal obligations of the United States?
Well, they don't. And going back to what Adolfo says, he wants to make a wall between economic and political. The U.S. has been carrying out wars in Central America against Haiti, even in the form of 2 coups d'etats against President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. We can really trace all of this migration back to the policies of the U.S., not just the period of recently of hurricanes and earthquakes and assassinations, but the coup d'etat against Aristide in 1990. This was when the economy began to take a nosedive, and the U.S. brought in neoliberal policies, which basically put state industries out of business. Thousands of people took to the seas because their economy, their agriculture was being crushed by U.S. dumping. That was carried out during the Clinton administration. And so the U.S. is leaving wreckage in these countries, and then they tell people, stay put.
Laura, Mexico has asked the United States for a number of humanitarian improvements, including guarantees that asylum seekers have access to legal counsel and that their claims will be processed in 180 days. Are these conditions being met?
Well, first, Anand, I have to respond that I find it absolutely unbelievable that a Republican strategist in Washington has become the spokesperson for the motivations of tens of thousands of desperate migrants who are coming up through Mexico, through Central America, in very dangerous conditions, simply because the conditions in their home countries are even more dangerous. We've talked to people who have left from one day to the next with only the shirt on their backs because of death threats. We've talked to people who have faced all sorts of life and death situations before making this drastic decision to come up here. As far as the guarantees on the MPP program, we already know those guarantees cannot be met, because the leading organizations that have been the only ones, and they're non-governmental organizations, practically who are providing legal counsel to these immigrants, have said that they won't do it because they believe that the entire program is unjust and there's no way to fix it, even if you were to increase legal services, that there's a fundamental injustice to the program because people are far from their legal services and because they're forced to live in these dangerous conditions as they wait. I would also like to correct another point, which is that the legal system in the United States, the court, the Fifth District Court, did not rule that MPP is not illegal or inhumane. What it ruled is that there was a violation of rules procedures in the process of terminating the program. That's an important distinction. We continue to maintain, and there are a number of legal cases still pending, both in Mexico and in the United States, that the program is inhumane. And anyone who goes to these camps and sees the conditions that the migrants who are waiting for months, oftentimes, as has been mentioned, are facing would be able to verify that in 5 minutes.
Kate, I'm wondering if you could clarify something for us, and that is the criteria for someone to seek asylum. I mean, is it purely political persecution, or is it a combination of political persecution, fear of violence, economic factors? I mean, what is the legitimate criteria?
Well, it is not, as Adolfo claims, someone fleeing a repressive regime. That is actually nowhere in the asylum laws. What refugees or asylum applicants need to show is that they have a fear of persecution based upon one of the protected grounds, which is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, which can be a family. It can be a survivor of domestic violence. And I'd like to tell you about a client of mine, a single mother of an 8-year-old girl. She was in a violent relationship in the Northern Triangle. She fled her relationship. And I just have to say, the kind of people who are able to do this, who to pick themselves up and get out of everything they've ever known with their child in tow and get themselves to the border, like, these are the kind of people we want here around us. But she came to the border and she was rejected under this Title 42 policy. Both she and her daughter were sent back to Mexico. And like all of these vulnerable migrants, or 50% of these vulnerable migrants, they were kidnapped. And in that kidnapping, this little 8-year-old girl escaped. And she managed to get across the border alone because Title 42 exempts unaccompanied migrant kids. Mom, meanwhile, is in the hands of the kidnappers, and this poor child is in detention for a month, thinking her mother is dead. I'm representing her through all of this. We all thought her mother was dead, and then her mother escapes the kidnappers. We're miraculously able to get her through over some litigation that was pending, and they are now reunited. I'm so happy to report. But I just want to highlight this case because it shows that had we not had these policies in place at all, this mother and this daughter would have been able to present at the bridge, claim fear, take a credible fear interview, and prepare for an asylum hearing. What we had pre-Trump, pre-MPP, pre-Title 42 was a systematic process for people to apply for asylum. And everything is broken right now, and it is creating so much chaos and confusion and violence and death and destruction. And it is not that complicated. We need to go back to what we had before.
Adolfo, a quick response from you on that.
Well, I think I need more than a quick response. With all due respect to the program, I think having 3 extreme leftist views and then having me always having to respond to 3 or 4 guests that are absolutely wrong, it just doesn't seem adequate to me. Let me start out with Haiti. I was in the Situation Room with the president when these things happened with respect to Haiti. There was no U.S. coup, and this blame America nonsense is just absolute nonsense. These are, again, I worked Haiti issues. I was the assistant administrator of AID. I ran the entire Latin America program. I have seen more thousands of people than any of the guests on this program, including in Central America, including in Mexico, and countless trips with Secretary Powell to Haiti. All of these are intending immigrants. Their attorney here is absolutely wrong. This is they have tried repeatedly to extend the law to be beyond institutional persecution of individuals, and to say that somebody is the threat of rape or so forth is not the basis, or fear, to come into the United States. It's just a flat-out wrong. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on it is, it's the Biden administration's decision that didn't appeal it. It was absolutely a procedural matter, but the Biden administration said that they were being forced to go back to the remain in Mexico policy because there was a clear writing in the wall. The United States Supreme Court would uphold that. So this is a pushing, and I've seen it in my entire career, of the expression is using of the envelope to try to put in the peg of asylum what everybody's ignoring here, which is the reality. And I was here in the Reagan administration with 3 million people. These are economic refugees. That's what's coming, whether it's Haiti or Central America or any of these other places. That is why they do not want to remain in Mexico. That is why they do not want to remain in Mexico.
Just one moment, Adolfo. You said that more than once, that these are economic refugees, that these are intending migrants, etc. But I mean, they're also escaping violence. They are escaping poverty, and in Haiti's case, they're escaping a natural disaster as well.
Yes, but that's not our law, because if what happens is, broadly speaking, under the law, that if we were just to allow people to come to the United States because of the horrible situations, and I've worked Latin America issues on the ground in every single Latin American country for 30 years. If that's the standard, then we need to allow several billion people into the country. because they would qualify.
Okay.
And so no, but so that's a reality. And in other programs on the heat, you yourself have asked me questions about the need for labor in the U.S., the fact that we need to bring people into the country, and so forth, and justifying illegal immigration. One way or another, the wall the guests have here, the three of them, and I respect their views, but their views, the wall they're up against is the following.
Yeah.
The laws of the United States do not square with their positions. They just do not. So what their solution should be is to change the laws of the United States to their point of view, if they're able to do so. If not, respect the law and not try to create standards that are really non-existent or largely
All right, I want to
outliers.
go to Kim. Kim, Adolfo was talking about Haiti and Haitians there. There are thousands of Haitians who've tried to enter the United States. It would seem to me, and I'm no lawyer, that they would, under some circumstances, qualify for asylum.
Yes, I think so, and I think the situation is so dire, and Adolfo should know that, and I think it's patently false to say that the U.S. was not involved in the coups d'états against Aristide in 1991 and 2004. This is patent.
I was there. I was present.
Well, maybe you were part of it. I don't know.
No, I can assure you it was not. By the way, President Aristide was a drug dealer, for your information.
Okay,
drug dealer.
Let
well,
him finish.
There we go.
Yes,
I
he
mean,
was.
I would love to see the evidence on that.
We have it.
And I mean, come on. I mean,
no, come on. I'm privy to information. You're not.
Okay, Kim, go ahead. Adolfo, give him a break.
No, I think the point is the U.S. government has seen itself as exceptional throughout at least the past century, invading where they will, waging war where they will, carrying out policies that destroy other countries' economies. And they've done that to Haiti. Haiti used to feed itself 40 years ago. Now it does not. It cannot. And this was due to U.S. policies, neoliberal trade policies, and coups d'états against legitimately elected governments. This is the essence, and this is true in Central America too. The wars waged against Nicaragua, the war waged against Venezuela.
Yeah.
These countries that you say are so repressive are simply trying to resist your offensive, Adolfo. Throughout these
let me ask you this. So you're advocating for a return to the Duvalier regime? That's when Haiti was.
Not the Duvalier regime.
That's when Haiti was feeding. That's when Haiti was feeding itself.
Not at all. No.
Really?
On the contrary. On the contrary, the U.S. was supporting the Duvalier regime. This is also documented.
But you just made a reference to go back to 40 years ago when people could feed themselves.
No,
that was the Duvalier regime.
I'm talking about, okay. We're playing mathematical.
No, we're playing facts.
I'm simply saying.
Kim, finish what you're saying. I'm rapidly running out of time. Go ahead.
Okay, the point is that whether we're talking about Central America or Haiti or many other countries in the South, generally speaking, these are both economic and political refugees. And because of U.S. economic and political policies.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arlen Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.